Be a man and stop begging for kisses, Nessa Kerrick snapped at me one Thursday night, pushing my hand away like I was some desperate teenager fumbling in the dark. Her voice carried that sharp edge she'd perfected over our 8 years of marriage, the tone that could slice through steel and leave you wondering what you'd done wrong this time. I didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't ask her what had changed between us, or when affection had become something I needed to earn rather than share. Instead, I rolled over, stared at the ceiling of our bedroom, and made a decision that would reshape everything. I stopped trying. My name is Rowan Kerrick, and I build custom cars for a living. Muscle cars, classics, the kind of machines that purr like lions and turn heads at every stoplight. It's honest work that requires patience, precision, and the ability to see potential where others see rust and broken dreams. Skills that, as it turned out, would prove useful in ways I never expected. The morning after Nessa's declaration, I woke up at 5:30 as usual, but instead of lingering in bed hoping she might soften, I headed straight to the garage. My current project was a 1967 Mustang Fastback, cherry red with racing stripes that hadn't seen daylight in 20 years. The owner wanted it restored to showroom condition, and I was 3 weeks into what would be a 6-month job. "Morning, boss," called Jake, my apprentice, as he wheeled in a cart of tools. Jake was 22, eager as a golden retriever, and possessed the rare combination of natural talent and willingness to learn that made him invaluable. "Coffee's brewing if you want some." "Thanks," I said, already focused on the engine block I'd been rebuilding. "We need to finish the timing chain today. Mrs. Henderson wants progress photos by Friday." Jake nodded and got to work, but I could feel him watching me. He'd been around long enough to read my moods, and this morning I was operating with a different energy. Sharper, more focused, like I'd shed some invisible weight that had been dragging me down. The truth was, I felt liberated. For months, maybe years, I'd been walking on eggshells around Nessa, trying to decode her moods, anticipating her needs, working overtime to maintain a connection she seemed determined to sever. Now, with her permission, no, her demand, to stop trying, I could redirect that energy into something productive. By lunch, we'd made more progress on the Mustang than we had all week. Jake was grinning as he torqued down the last bolt on the timing cover. "Man, you're on fire today," he said. "What's got you so motivated?" "Sometimes you need to stop forcing things and let them find their natural rhythm," I replied, wiping grease from my hands. "Engines work better when every component knows its job and does it without interference." "Deep thoughts from the master mechanic," Jake laughed. "You sound like one of those fortune cookies." I was about to respond when my phone buzzed. Text from Nessa. "Working late tonight, don't wait up." 6 months ago, that message would have triggered a cascade of questions and concerns. Tonight, I simply typed back, "Okay." No follow-up questions, no requests for details, no emotional labor invested in managing her schedule or feelings. It felt strange, like flexing a muscle I'd forgotten I had. That evening, instead of sitting at home wondering when she'd return, I drove to Murphy's gym. It was a no-nonsense place with heavy bags, free weights, and the kind of regulars who minded their own business. I'd been a member for years, but rarely found time to use it consistently. "Rowan?" The voice belonged to Lyra Ventrix, Nessa's best friend since college. She was stepping off a treadmill, toweling sweat from her forehead, looking surprised to see me. "I didn't know you worked out here." "Just getting back into it," I said. "Figured I needed a new routine." Lyra owned the gym, along with 2 others in neighboring towns. She was the kind of person who radiated competence and warmth in equal measure, qualities that had made her successful in business, and, I suspected, made her friendship with Nessa somewhat complicated. Where Nessa was sharp edges and calculated moves, Lyra was steady ground and genuine concern. "How's Nessa?" she asked, the question carrying more weight than casual small talk usually did. "She's working late," I said, which was true enough. Seems to be doing that more often lately. Something flickered across Lyra's expression, a micro-expression that lasted maybe half a second before she recovered her composure. but I'd caught it, and it told me she knew something I didn't. "Well," she said carefully, "if you're looking for a workout partner, I'm here most evenings around 7. Could use someone to spot me on the heavy lifts." "I might take you up on that," I said, and meant it. Over the next 2 weeks, I established a new rhythm. Up at 5:30, in the garage by 6, lunch at noon, gym at 7, home by 9. Nessa's schedule seemed to mirror mine in reverse. She was rarely home when I was there, and when our paths did cross, our interactions had the polite distance of roommates rather than spouses. She tested the boundaries a few times, left her laptop open with social media visible, hoping I'd ask about the comments from men I didn't recognize, mentioned plans with friends, pausing as if waiting for me to request details or express interest in joining. Each time I responded with the same neutral acknowledgement and went about my business. "You're different," she said one Saturday morning, standing in the kitchen doorway while I made coffee for 1 instead of 2. "How so?" I asked, not looking up from the coffee maker. "Distant. Cold. Like you don't care what happens anymore." I turned to face her then, taking in the designer workout clothes she wore like armor and the carefully applied makeup that suggested she was heading somewhere that required looking impressive. "You told me to be a man and stop begging," I said. "So I stopped. I thought that's what you wanted." "I didn't mean—" she started, then stopped herself. "Never mind. I'm meeting the girls for brunch." After she left, I called Lyra. We'd been working out together regularly, and she'd mentioned wanting to check out the antique car show in Millbrook. It seemed like a good day for it. "Rowan?" she answered on the second ring. "What's up? Still interested in that car show? I could use a second opinion on some restoration techniques." "Absolutely. Pick me up in an hour?" The car show was exactly what I needed. Rows of beautifully restored classics, their owners eager to discuss the finer points of engine rebuilds and paint jobs. Lyra proved to be excellent company, asking smart questions and showing genuine interest in the craftsmanship involved. "This is more fun than I expected," she said, as we examined a pristine 1969 Camaro SS. "I always thought car shows were just guys standing around comparing horsepower." "There's some of that," I admitted, "but mostly it's about appreciation for the work involved. See how they restored the original chrome instead of replacing it? That's probably 200 hours of polishing right there." 200 hours, she repeated. "That's dedication. Or obsession, depending on how you look at it." We were walking between rows of cars when my phone buzzed. Nessa again. "Where are you?" I showed the message to Lyra without thinking, then immediately regretted it. I didn't want to put her in an awkward position with her friend. "Sorry," I said. "I shouldn't have—" "It's fine," Lyra said, but her expression had shifted. "You should probably answer her." I typed back, "Car show in Millbrook." Then, after a moment's hesitation, added, "With Lyra." The response came immediately. "Why didn't you tell me?" "You didn't ask," I replied, then put the phone away. "Everything okay?" Lyra asked. "Define okay," I said, which made her laugh despite the tension. We spent another hour at the show, but something had changed. Lyra was more reserved, checking her own phone more frequently. I realized I'd inadvertently created a problem for her, and that wasn't fair. "I should probably head back," I said as we walked toward my truck. "Yeah, probably," she agreed. Then, after we'd driven in silence for a few minutes, "Rowan, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Are you and Nessa okay? I mean, really okay?" I considered the question carefully. Lyra was Nessa's friend first, and whatever I said would likely find its way back to my wife. But I was tired of pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. "Honestly, I don't know," I said. "We're like two people living parallel lives in the same house. Polite, functional, but not really connected." "Have you talked to her about it?" "I tried for a long time. But every conversation ended with me being told I was too needy, too demanding, too something. So I stopped having those conversations. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. "That's not the Nessa I know," she said finally. "Maybe that's the problem," I replied. "We all wear different faces for different people." When I dropped her off at her apartment, she hesitated before getting out of the truck. "Thanks for today," she said. "I had fun." "Me too. Maybe we can do it again sometime." "I'd like that," she said. "But Rowan? Be careful. I care about both of you, but this situation, it feels like it's heading somewhere complicated." She was right, of course. But as I drove home to an empty house and a wife who would likely spend the evening dissecting my day with her friends, I realized I was past the point of caring about complicated. I was ready for whatever came next. The burner phone fell out of Nessa's gym bag like a confession wrapped in black plastic. I wasn't snooping, just moving her bag from the laundry room floor so I could access the washing machine. The phone tumbled out along with a receipt from a restaurant I'd never heard of and a business card for someone named Theodore March. I picked up the phone and stared at it. In 8 years of marriage, Nessa had never owned a second phone. She barely tolerated the inconvenience of carrying one device, let alone two. My hands moved before my brain could stop them, pressing the power button. The screen lit up with 17 unread messages, all from a contact labeled T. My chest tightened as I scrolled through them, each message worse than the last. Explicit photos, meeting arrangements, complaints about having to pretend with the husband during family gatherings. The most recent exchange, from 2 days ago, made my hands shake. T. Can't wait to have you all to myself this weekend. Nessa. Soon. He's getting suspicious, but I can handle him. T. Maybe it's time to end the charade. You deserve better than some grease monkey who can't satisfy you. Nessa. Patience. I need to be smart about this. Too much money involved to rush. I set the phone down carefully, my mind racing. The Theodore March on the business card was apparently Theo March, senior partner at Blackstone Investment Group. I recognized the name from local news coverage. He'd made millions in hedge fund management and wasn't shy about flaunting his wealth. The smart thing would have been to confront Nessa immediately, demand an explanation, fight for our marriage like a man who believed it was worth saving. Instead, I photographed every message, returned the phone to her bag exactly where I'd found it, and went to my workshop. I needed time to think. The Mustang sat under fluorescent lights, its engine bay gleaming with fresh paint and rebuilt components. Working on cars had always been my form of meditation. The methodical process of disassembly, diagnosis, and reconstruction provided clarity that emotional chaos never could. "Problems?" Jake asked, noticing my tension as I stared at the engine without really seeing it. "Just working through some design challenges," I said. "Sometimes you discover that what you thought was solid is actually held together with cheap parts and wishful thinking. Sounds frustrating. It is. But once you know what you're dealing with, you can make better decisions about whether it's worth rebuilding or better to start fresh." Jake nodded and returned to his work, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I spent the rest of the day mechanically going through the motions of restoration, while my mind processed the implications of what I'd discovered. Nessa wasn't just having an affair, she was planning an exit strategy. The comment about money suggested she was calculating how to maximize her financial position in a divorce. The casual cruelty of her messages, particularly the dismissive reference to me as some grease monkey, revealed how little respect she had left for our marriage, or for me. That evening, I installed a small security camera in our living room. Nothing illegal or invasive, just a standard home security device pointed at the front entrance. If Nessa was bringing Theo to our house, I wanted documentation. I also made an appointment with David Chen, a divorce attorney I'd met through business connections. Not because I'd decided to file for divorce, but because I needed to understand my options and protect my assets. Smart move, David said, when I explained the situation during our consultation the next day. Massachusetts is a no-fault state, so the affair itself won't impact property division, but documentation of financial planning around divorce could be relevant. What about the business? That's more complex. Since you started the garage before marriage, it's likely considered separate property, but any growth in value during the marriage could be subject to division. We'd need to establish clear valuations and document any separate investments you've made. I left his office with homework. Gather financial records, document all marital assets, and avoid any actions that could be construed as hiding or dissipating assets. In other words, be methodical and patient. That night, Nessa came home at 11:30, claiming she'd been at dinner with her marketing team. She was overly affectionate, kissing my cheek and asking about my day with an enthusiasm that felt performative. "How's the Mustang coming along?" she asked, settling next to me on the couch. "Making progress. Should be finished ahead of schedule." "That's wonderful. You're so talented with those cars." She leaned against my shoulder. "I'm sorry I've been so busy lately. Work has been crazy, but things should calm down soon." "No problem," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I understand." She looked up at me, searching my face for something. "Are we okay, Rowan? You seem distant lately." "I'm fine, just focused on work." "Good," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. "Because I love you. You know that, right?" "Of course," I replied, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. The next morning, I reviewed the security footage from the previous night. Nessa had indeed come home at 11:30, but the timestamp showed her car leaving again at 12:45. She'd waited until I was asleep, then snuck out for what I could only assume was a late-night rendezvous with Theo. I felt strangely calm as I watched the footage. The last vestiges of hope that this might be a misunderstanding or temporary lapse in judgment evaporated, replaced by a cold clarity about what needed to happen next. At the gym that evening, Lyra immediately noticed my mood. "You look like someone who hasn't slept in a week," she said as we warmed up on adjacent treadmills. "Just some business complications," I said. "Nothing that can't be handled with proper planning." "Want to talk about it?" I considered telling her everything: the phone, the messages, the late-night departures. But Lyra was still Nessa's friend, and I wasn't ready to put her in that position. "Not yet," I said, "but I appreciate the offer." We worked out in companionable silence, but I could feel her watching me between sets. When we finished, she followed me to the parking lot. "Rowan, I know something's wrong," she said. "And I know you don't want to talk about it, but if you need anything, someone to listen, a place to crash, whatever, I'm here." "Why would I need a place to crash?" She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Because I know Nessa, and when she gets that look in her eyes, the calculating one, it usually means someone's about to get hurt." "What look?" "The one she's had for the past month, whenever your name comes up." Lyra crossed her arms, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. "Look, she's my friend, but she's not perfect. And if she's doing something that could hurt you, I want you to know you're not alone." I stared at her, realizing she suspected more than she was saying. "Has she told you something?" "Not directly, but she's been asking a lot of questions about your business, your income, whether you have any debts or investments she doesn't know about. It felt like research, not curiosity." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Nessa wasn't just planning to leave. She was conducting financial reconnaissance, probably with Theo's help. The affair was bad enough, but the calculated betrayal of gathering intelligence for a divorce battle felt like a violation of everything marriage was supposed to represent. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done weeks ago," I replied. "Stop pretending everything is fine and start protecting myself." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, Drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. That night, I moved all my business records to a safe deposit box and changed the passwords on every account I controlled. I also called Mrs. Henderson and several other clients to accelerate payment schedules, ensuring that outstanding invoices would be paid before any divorce proceedings could complicate collections. When Nessa asked about the sudden flurry of phone calls, I told her I was expanding the business and needed to secure working capital. It was even partially true. "That's exciting," she said. "How much are we talking about?" "Still working out the details," I replied, noting how quickly she'd said "we" when discussing money that had nothing to do with her. 2 days later, I followed her to Theo's penthouse downtown. I didn't plan to confront them. I just needed to see for myself what I was up against. The building was everything I'd expected. Glass and steel, valet parking, the kind of place where a custom car mechanic would be politely but firmly discouraged from lingering. I watched from across the street as Nessa's BMW pulled into the garage. She emerged wearing a dress I'd never seen before, something that probably cost more than most people made in a week. The doorman greeted her by name. This wasn't a recent development. She'd been coming here long enough to be recognized, comfortable enough to dress for the occasion. The careful planning behind her deception was almost impressive in its thoroughness. My phone buzzed with a text from her. "Working late again. Don't wait up." I typed back, "Okay," then drove home to an empty house and began planning my next move. If Nessa wanted to play games with our marriage, I'd make sure I was the one writing the rules. The Millbrook annual charity auction was the kind of event where appearances mattered more than authenticity, where couples smiled for photos while calculating the social value of their donations. Nessa had insisted we attend together, claiming it was important for our image in the community. I agreed, but not for the reasons she expected. "You look handsome," she said as we walked toward the hotel ballroom, her arm linked through mine in a performance of marital unity. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a midnight blue dress that photographed well and jewelry that suggested prosperity without ostentation. "Thank you," I replied, adjusting the cufflinks she'd given me for our 5th anniversary. "You look beautiful." And she did. Nessa had always possessed the kind of striking beauty that turned heads and opened doors. Tonight, she was using every weapon in her arsenal, playing the role of devoted wife with an expertise that might have been convincing if I hadn't known better. The ballroom buzzed with conversation and the clink of champagne glasses. Local business owners, politicians, and social climbers mingled under crystal chandeliers, their laughter carefully modulated to suggest both enjoyment and sophistication. "Rowan! Nessa!" The voice belonged to Margaret Walsh, wife of the mayor and unofficial queen of Millbrook's social scene. "How wonderful to see you both. Nessa, darling, you absolutely must tell me about that marketing campaign for the Henderson Group. Everyone's talking about it." Nessa beamed, launching into a detailed explanation of brand positioning and market penetration that had Margaret nodding with the enthusiasm of someone who understood perhaps half of what was being said. I watched my wife perform, noting how naturally she commanded attention, how effortlessly she made herself the center of any conversation. "And what about you, Rowan?" Margaret asked, turning to me with the polite interest reserved for spouses of more interesting people. "How's the car business?" "Busy," I said. "Just finished restoring a '67 Mustang. Sometimes the old classics just need someone willing to put in the work to bring them back to their original glory." Nessa's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. She caught the subtext, even if Margaret didn't. "How fascinating," Margaret said. "Well, I hope you both enjoy the evening. The auction items this year are simply divine." As she moved away, Nessa's grip on my arm tightened. "Subtle," she murmured. "I thought so," I replied. The evening progressed predictably until the auction began. Items ranged from weekend getaways to original artwork, each bid accompanied by polite applause and knowing looks about who could afford what. I participated minimally, raising my paddle for a few modest items while observing the crowd. That's when I saw him. Theodore March stood near the bar, resplendent in a tailored tuxedo that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He was everything I wasn't. Tall, conventionally handsome, radiating the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. When he smiled, which he did frequently, it was with the practiced charm of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. He was also watching Nessa with barely concealed hunger. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer announced, "our final item tonight is truly special. A week-long Mediterranean cruise for two, donated by Blackstone Investment Group." Theo stepped forward to acknowledge the applause, his gaze finding Nessa in the crowd. The look that passed between them lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but it was enough. I saw recognition, desire, and a shared secret that excluded everyone else in the room. "The bidding will start at $5,000, the auctioneer continued. Hands went up around the room. 10,000, 15, 20. As the price climbed, the number of bidders dwindled until only 3 remained. A real estate developer I recognized, a woman whose husband owned half the restaurants in town, and me. 25,000, I called out, raising my paddle. Nessa turned to stare at me in shock. We'd never spent that kind of money on a vacation, and she knew it. 30,000, the real estate developer countered. 35, I replied without hesitation. The room had gone quiet, sensing drama in the escalating bids. The developer shook his head and stepped back. The restaurant owner's wife looked at her husband, who shrugged and lowered his paddle. 35,000 going once, the auctioneer said. Going twice. 40,000, a new voice called out. Theodore March had entered the bidding. The crowd murmured with interest. This was no longer about charity. It was a contest, and everyone could feel it. 45, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent ballroom. Theo's eyes met mine across the room. He smiled, the expression predatory and confident. 50,000, he said. I could feel Nessa's tension beside me, her breathing shallow and quick. She knew what was happening, even if she didn't understand why. 60,000, I announced. The crowd gasped. Even for this crowd, $60,000 for a cruise was excessive. But I wasn't bidding on a vacation. I was making a statement. Theo hesitated for the first time, his confidence wavering. 50,000 was probably his limit for a gesture, but 60,000 was serious money, even for him. 60,000 going once, the auctioneer said, his voice tight with excitement. Going twice. Sold, he declared as Theo remained silent. To Mr. Kerrick for $60,000. The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it. I was watching Theo's face as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered in front of half the town's elite. His smile had become a grimace, and when his eyes found mine again, there was no mistaking the anger there. Rowan, Nessa hissed as we moved toward the payment table. What are you doing? We can't afford this. Actually, we can, I said quietly. The Henderson restoration came in ahead of schedule, and I've got 3 more jobs lined up. Business is good when you focus on what matters. This is insane. A $60,000 cruise? Think of it as an investment in our marriage, I replied, signing the payment authorization with a flourish. After all, you're always saying we need to spend more time together. The look she gave me could have stripped paint, but she maintained her smile for the photographers capturing the evening's big moments. As we prepared to leave, Theo appeared beside us as if materializing from the crowd. Congratulations on your winning bid, he said, extending his hand. Theodore March, I don't believe we've met. Rowan Kerrick, I replied, shaking his hand with just enough pressure to make a point. And this is my wife, Nessa. Charmed, Theo said, kissing Nessa's hand with theatrical gallantry. I hope you enjoy the cruise. The Mediterranean is beautiful this time of year. I'm sure we will, I said. There's nothing like spending quality time with the person you love, away from all the distractions and temptations of everyday life. Theo's smile tightened. Indeed. Well, I should let you get back to your evening. Perhaps we'll run into each other again soon. I doubt it, I replied pleasantly. Nessa and I prefer to keep our social circle small and trustworthy. As he walked away, Nessa turned to me with barely controlled fury. What was that about? Just being friendly, I said. He seems like the type who's used to getting what he wants. I thought it might be educational for him to experience disappointment. The ride home was silent, except for the hum of the engine and Nessa's barely audible muttering. I could feel her anger radiating from the passenger seat, but I was past caring about her comfort. When we reached our house, she finally exploded. $60,000, Rowan, for a cruise we'll probably never take. Have you lost your mind? Why wouldn't we take it? I asked, loosening my tie. It's a romantic getaway for two. Isn't that what every marriage needs? You know that's not what this was about. That whole scene with Theodore March. What about it? She caught herself before saying too much, but the slip was revealing. She'd used his first name, spoken about him with the familiarity of someone who knew him well. Nothing, she said finally. I just think you were showing off, and it was embarrassing. Embarrassing for whom? For both of us. People will think we're trying too hard to prove something. Maybe we are, I said, heading toward the stairs. Or maybe I just wanted to make sure everyone knows how much I value my wife and our marriage. I left her standing in the foyer, her face a mask of confusion and barely contained rage. As I changed clothes, I could hear her pacing downstairs, probably trying to figure out how to explain the evening's events to her lover. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Nice show tonight, but money can't buy everything. I typed back, no, but it can certainly make a point. Give my regards to Nessa when you see her next. The response came immediately. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Enjoy your evening, Theodore. I know I will. I turned off the phone and went to bed, leaving Nessa to deal with the aftermath of her exposed secret. For the first time in months, I slept soundly, knowing that the game had finally begun in earnest. Tomorrow, I would start playing to win. The anonymous text arrived at 3 a.m. Your wife deserves better than a pathetic loser who has to buy respect. I stared at the glowing screen in our dark bedroom, listening to Nessa's carefully regulated breathing beside me. She was awake, had been since my phone buzzed, but pretending to sleep. Probably wondering if Theo was drunk texting me, if their carefully constructed facade was crumbling faster than they'd anticipated. I typed back, at least I don't have to steal other men's wives to feel like a man. The response was immediate. She comes to me willingly. Every time. Enjoy it while it lasts, I replied, then blocked the number. But Theodore March had made a critical error. His need to gloat, to rub his conquest in my face, had revealed just how much my public humiliation of him had stung. Men like Theo were accustomed to winning through intimidation and superior resources. When that failed, they usually resorted to more direct methods. I was counting on it. The next morning, I arrived at the garage early to find Jake already there, working on the prep for our next project, a 1970 Chevelle SS that had been sitting in a barn for 30 years. Boss, you've got a visitor, Jake said, nodding toward the office. Some guy in an expensive suit. Says he wants to discuss a business opportunity. I found Theo sitting in my desk chair, examining the framed photos of completed restorations that lined my office walls. He'd made himself comfortable, jacket off, tie loosened, projecting the casual arrogance of someone who owned whatever space he occupied. Mr. Kerrick, he said without standing, I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I was in the neighborhood and thought we should have a conversation. About what? About realistic expectations. about knowing your place in the world. He gestured around the garage with theatrical disdain. This is a nice little business you have here. Simple, honest. The kind of work that keeps the world running while more important people handle the complex decisions. Is there a point to this? Theo stood then, straightening his tie with deliberate precision. The point, Mr. Kerrick, is that some things are out of your league. Some people are out of your league. And when you try to punch above your weight class, you end up embarrassing yourself. Like last night? His mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the wounded pride beneath the polished exterior. Last night was a tantrum, a child acting out because he doesn't understand the adult world. And what world is that? The world where men like me take what we want from men like you, and there's nothing you can do about it except write bigger checks and pretend it matters. I leaned against the doorframe, studying him with genuine curiosity. You really believe that, don't you? That money and status give you the right to destroy other people's lives. I don't destroy anything, Theo said. I simply recognize opportunities that already exist. Unhappy wives, unfulfilled women, marriages that are already over in everything but paperwork. Is that what Nessa told you? That our marriage was over? Nessa doesn't need to tell me anything. It's written all over her face every time she looks at you. Disappointment, resignation, the quiet desperation of a woman who settled for less than she deserved. The words were designed to wound, and they might have succeeded if I hadn't already seen the text messages, hadn't already known exactly what kind of man I was dealing with. You're probably right, I said. Marriage is complicated. Sometimes people grow apart, want different things, find themselves attracted to other options. Theo smiled, thinking he'd scored a victory. Exactly. So why make this more difficult than it needs to be? Nessa wants out. You want to keep your dignity. There's a way to make this work for everyone. I'm listening. Uncontested divorce. Clean split. You keep your little garage, she keeps her freedom, and everyone moves on with their lives. No lawyers, no drama, no public humiliation. And if I refuse? Then things get messy. Allegations of emotional abuse, questions about your business practices, tax audits, the kind of scrutiny that can destroy a small operation like this. His smile widened. I have resources, Mr. Kerrick, connections, the ability to make life very difficult for people who don't cooperate. I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering his proposal. That's quite an offer, but I have a counter-proposal. I'm listening. Get out of my garage before I throw you out. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Theo's facade of civilized negotiation evaporated, replaced by something uglier and more honest. You're making a mistake, he said. Probably. But it's my mistake to make. He put on his jacket with sharp, angry movements. You have no idea what you're up against. Actually, I think I do. You're a bully who's used to getting his way through intimidation and money. But you made one critical error. Which is? You assumed I cared about keeping what I have more than I care about making you pay for taking it. Theo paused at the door, his hand on the handle. What's that supposed to mean? It means you should have taken the win and walked away. Instead, you came here to gloat, to rub my face in your conquest. That tells me this isn't just about Nessa. It's about proving you're better than me. And that kind of pride makes men do stupid things. Like spending $60,000 on a cruise? Like underestimating someone who has nothing left to lose. After he left, I called David Chen and scheduled an emergency meeting. If Theo was planning to play dirty, I needed to be prepared. Document everything, David advised when I explained the situation. His threats, his visit to your business, any attempts to interfere with your operations. If he follows through on any of his intimidation tactics, we'll have grounds for a restraining order at minimum. What about Nessa? That's more complicated. She hasn't technically done anything illegal, and Massachusetts is a no-fault state. But if we can prove she's been planning this divorce while hiding assets or providing information to facilitate harassment, then what? Then we have leverage. Not enough to change the outcome significantly, but enough to ensure she doesn't walk away with everything she wants. That evening, I installed additional security cameras around the garage and my house. If Theo was planning sabotage, I wanted evidence. I also made copies of all my business records and stored them in multiple locations. Nessa came home late again, claiming she'd been working on a presentation for a new client. She was nervous, checking her phone constantly and jumping at every sound. "Everything all right?" I asked as we got ready for bed. "Fine, just tired. It's been a long week." "I'm sure it has. By the way, Theodore March stopped by the garage today." She froze, her hand halfway to the light switch. "What did he want?" "To discuss business opportunities. Seems like an interesting guy. Very confident. The type who's used to getting what he wants." "What did you tell him?" "That I wasn't interested in his particular type of opportunity." I watched her face carefully. "Why? Do you know him?" "Just by reputation. He's well known in business circles." "I'm sure he is. Well, I doubt we'll see much of him. Men like that don't usually waste time on people they can't use." Nessa nodded and turned off the light, but I could feel her tension in the darkness. Her breathing was shallow, irregular, the pattern of someone whose mind was racing. My phone buzzed with another text from a different number. "Last warning. Take the deal or face the consequences." I showed the message to Nessa. "Looks like someone's trying to intimidate me. Any idea who might do something like this?" She studied the screen, her face pale in the phone's glow. "No. Maybe you should call the police." "Maybe I should. Anonymous threats are serious business." I forwarded the message to David Chen and saved it to my evidence file. Tomorrow, I would file a police report and begin the process of documenting Theo's harassment campaign. But tonight, I would let Nessa wonder exactly how much I knew and how far I was willing to go to protect what was mine. The game was escalating, and I intended to be the last man standing. The Millbrook Business Association's annual gala was held at the Ocean View Resort, a sprawling complex that overlooked the rocky coastline where generations of New England families had built their fortunes. Tonight, it would serve as the stage for the final act of a drama that had been building for months. I arrived alone, having told Nessa I would meet her there after finishing a client consultation. In reality, I'd spent the afternoon making final preparations for what would either be my vindication or my destruction. The ballroom glittered with crystal and candlelight, filled with the same crowd that had witnessed my $60,000 gesture weeks earlier. Tonight, they would see something far more dramatic. "Rowan!" Margaret Walsh materialized beside me, resplendent in silver silk and diamonds. "How wonderful to see you. Where's Nessa?" "She'll be along shortly," I said, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "Business calls, you know how it is." "Of course. I heard about your recent success with the Henderson account. Word is you're expanding the operation." "Considering it. Sometimes growth requires making difficult decisions about what's worth preserving and what needs to be discarded." Margaret nodded sagely, missing the subtext entirely. "Very wise. Oh, there's Theodore March. Have you met him? Absolutely charming man." I followed her gaze to where Theo held court near the bar, surrounded by the usual collection of admirers and sycophants. He looked supremely confident, wearing success like an expensive cologne. "We've met," I said. 20 minutes later, Nessa arrived in a stunning red dress that turned heads throughout the room. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting compliments and air kisses while scanning for familiar faces. When her eyes found mine, her smile faltered for just a moment before resuming its perfect wattage. "Darling," she said, kissing my cheek with theatrical affection. "Sorry I'm late. The Henderson presentation ran longer than expected." "No problem. I've been enjoying the conversation." She linked her arm through mine, playing the devoted wife for our audience, but I could feel the tension in her grip, see the calculation behind her eyes as she assessed the room. "Have you seen Lyra?" she asked casually. "She's over by the silent auction, bidding on that photography package." Nessa's gaze found her best friend across the room. Lyra was examining auction items with apparent interest, but I knew she was actually positioning herself for what was about to unfold. She'd agreed to help, despite her obvious discomfort with the situation. "I should go say hello," Nessa said. "In a moment. I think they're about to start the presentations." The evening's program included recognition of local business achievements and a keynote speech about economic development. I'd requested a few minutes to address the crowd about small business growth, a request that had been readily granted given my recent high-profile success. As the formal program began, I watched Theo position himself near the front of the room, clearly expecting to be called upon for remarks. His type always did. They couldn't resist an opportunity to be seen and heard by influential people. "Ladies and gentlemen," the association president announced, "we're pleased to recognize several outstanding local businesses tonight. First, let's welcome Rowan Kerrick of Precision Automotive Restoration." I walked to the podium as polite applause filled the room. Nessa's smile was brilliant but brittle, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "Thank you," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "When I started my business 8 years ago, I thought success meant building beautiful cars and satisfied customers, and that's still true. But I've learned something else about success. It requires honesty, integrity, the willingness to face difficult truths about the people and relationships we invest in." The crowd murmured approval, expecting a standard speech about business ethics and community values. Recently, I discovered that someone very close to me had been conducting secret business behind my back, planning transactions that would benefit them at my expense, working with outside parties to undermine everything I'd built. The murmur grew louder. This wasn't the usual Chamber of Commerce rhetoric. Now, I could have confronted this betrayal privately, could have tried to negotiate a quiet resolution, but I realized that would only enable more of the same behavior. Sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to expose the truth publicly and let the community decide who deserves their trust and support. I reached into my jacket and withdrew a manila envelope. These are copies of text messages, financial records, and recorded conversations that document a conspiracy to defraud me of my business assets and personal property. A conspiracy involving my wife, Nessa Kerrick, and her lover, Theodore March. The silence that followed was absolute. 500 people holding their collective breath while my words sank in. The evidence shows months of planning, including detailed discussions of how to manipulate divorce proceedings, hide assets, and destroy my reputation if I refuse to cooperate. It also documents Mr. March's attempts to intimidate me through threats against my business and personal safety. I looked directly at Nessa, who stood frozen near the back of the room, her face white with shock and horror. Beside her, Theo was pushing through the crowd toward the exit, but the room was too packed for quick movement. I'm not sharing this information to embarrass anyone or seek revenge. I'm sharing it because this community deserves to know who they're doing business with, who they can trust with their investments, their confidences, their friendships. The crowd erupted in shocked conversation. Phones appeared as people began recording and photographing the chaos. Near the auction tables, Lyra watched with obvious distress, but didn't move to intervene. The complete evidence file has been provided to local law enforcement and will be made available to anyone who wishes to verify these claims. Thank you for your time. I stepped away from the podium as the room exploded into chaos. Reporters from the local newspaper pushed forward, shouting questions. Association officials huddled in urgent consultation. And through it all, Nessa stood paralyzed, while Theo fought his way toward the exit. He almost made it. The confrontation happened in the resort's parking lot, under harsh security lights that turned everything stark and dramatic. Theo had reached his BMW when I caught up with him, my footsteps echoing off the asphalt. "You coward!" I called out. "Running away without even trying to deny it?" He turned, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. "You have no idea what you've done. The people I know, the connections I have, you'll never work in this state again." "Maybe not, but neither will you, once word spreads about your business practices. You think this is over? You think destroying my reputation fixes your pathetic marriage? My marriage was over the moment Nessa chose you over honesty, but your reputation? That's just getting started." Theo lunged at me then, his control finally snapping. But 8 years of physical work had kept me in better shape than his gym membership and personal trainer had managed for him. I sidestepped his clumsy swing and grabbed his arm, using his momentum to slam him against his car. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice low and controlled. "You're going to get in your car and drive away. You're going to stay away from my wife, my business, and my life. And if you ever threaten me again, I'll make tonight look like a friendly conversation." "You can't." "I can, and I will. Because unlike you, I have nothing left to lose, and that makes me very dangerous." I released him and stepped back. Theo straightened his jacket with shaking hands, his face pale under the parking lot lights. "This isn't over," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "Yes, it is." He drove away with tires squealing, leaving me alone under the stars with the sound of waves crashing against the rocks below. In the distance, I could see people streaming out of the resort, their evening's entertainment thoroughly disrupted. My phone buzzed with a text from Lyra. "Are you okay?" I typed back, "Better than I've been in months." "Where are you?" "Parking lot, watching Theo make his exit." "And Nessa?" I looked toward the resort entrance, where my wife stood silhouetted against the warm light spilling from the ballroom. She was alone, abandoned by her lover and exposed to the judgment of everyone she'd tried so hard to impress. "Nessa is exactly where she chose to be," I replied. As I walked toward my truck, she called out to me, "Rowan, wait, please." I stopped, but didn't turn around. "What is it, Nessa?" "We need to talk. I can explain." "There's nothing to explain. You made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences." "But I love you. I made mistakes, but we can fix this." I turned then, studying her face in the harsh light. She was still beautiful, still capable of commanding attention and inspiring desire. But I could see through the performance now, see the calculation behind every word and gesture. "No," I said simply. "We can't." I drove home to an empty house and a future that was uncertain, but finally, completely my own. The game was over, and I had won the only victory that mattered, my freedom from a marriage that had become a prison, and a wife who had never truly been my partner. Behind me, the Ocean View Resort glowed against the dark sky, its lights reflecting off the water like fallen stars. Tomorrow, the story would spread through town like wildfire, destroying reputations and ending careers. But tonight, for the first time in years, I slept peacefully,